Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Silver Track Extra, where we give you tools, tips, and tricks to improve your guard management, retain more customers, win more contracts, and gain the upper hand against your competitors. Here are your hosts, Chris Anderson and Johnny Page.
What's up, Silver Track Nation? Johnny Page here, and Chris Anderson, the mad scientist. Chris Anderson.
Mad scientist is so true.
The man himself, here on episode number 75, which is part of our 6-part series on the keys to managing supervisors. Today we're tackling part 3, where we're talking about really establishing a process. So let's back up a second, give a little bit of context to where we're at here, Chris. We started off by basically identifying that a real key to growth, and there's this point in a company's history where the core management team is really going to be the foundation for growing. It's kind of, you get to a point where unless you have that core around you, you just end up being the owner in your business who's really holds everything on your shoulders. The business will only go as far as you take it. And unless we get to a point where you have that core management team who can really take on responsibility and carry your company forward, you're not going to be able to grow. So we in episode 1 of this series, we talked about really that owner, the dilemma of the owner, and laid out a plan that over the next 6 episodes we go over. And in part 2, we talked about really sharing the vision with that management team, that's really the first step in this process of solving that dilemma as an owner, is laying out the vision so that your managers know what we're going to manage towards, or your supervisors understand their role in the business so that they really understand how they affect the vision, and really getting them to buy into that vision. So today we're talking about really establishing the process for that vision. And so, Chris, you know, as someone who's owned a business before, that the process is really the wheels to the vision. If you're really going to go somewhere and you start to push this thing in motion, it comes down to establishing a functioning process.
Yeah, and you bring up some good points too, and I think a lot of guys out there, before we get started in this, a lot of them are going to say, hey, dudes, is everybody going to embrace, an organization going to embrace this vision? Is everybody on board with our core beliefs and our values and what our mission is? And I think part of the problem, we'll get into this, is that we don't have really, how can I say this without sounding too insulting? We really don't have really a lot of good managers in our business, right? We haven't really taught them even how to be a manager. And what I mean by that is that practicing being a manager, whether it's just people skills and conversations, right? So in other words, you got somebody with a manager thought, and then now you want to teach them your values and your mission. That itself is pretty difficult in this industry because we don't have the money to pay, a qualified, quote unquote, manager to come into our business, learn it, and be a manager. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So it's tough for everybody to really, to get to somebody, get to that point and have that clear image of what the future is really going to hold for anybody,
Yeah, and I would say hands down, you talk to people, no matter what organization you go to, it doesn't matter what industry, the biggest factor in the success of a business is the people in the business. It's always going to be hard. It's always good people and great employees are few and far between, but that doesn't mean that we grow weary in the search. You can't give up, right? You've got to continue to look for and develop really solid employees because someone's going to do it, right? So some business is going to figure it out. Some business is going to find the right guys. It might as well be your business, right?
Yeah.
And so when you find the right guys, or even in the process of searching through, process and having a consistent way of going about even the most day-to-day tasks is incredibly important to actually solving this problem for a business owner. And this is something all too often, Chris, how often are we on the phone with an owner who wants to take his business to the next level, but he can't even get 5 minutes outside of working in his business to make a decision that would help him start working on his business. It is like always a problem. We see it over and over again of an owner who's just buried in his own business, right?
Every single one of them, man. And a few listeners out there, you guys don't feel bad. Everybody's doing the same thing you are doing, and you guys know the bigger they are. With some of the international and national guys, they struggle, on a larger scale because they're so big they can't even manage what they have there because they're constantly buying companies, and so it's even difficult for them. So don't get discouraged. So that's why we do what we do, to show you and help you with this stuff. So just want to throw that out.
Yeah, and we're going to kick into 3 reasons why process is really, really important here in a minute. But I want to give a quick example. It's quite often that we talk to companies or an owner that is super buried, and eventually they're getting to a point where I have absolutely got to block off some time to where I can get something like SilverTrack or some sort of software solution, whether it's for their scheduling or for their payroll or for their hiring process, whatever it might be, that's really bogging them down. When they block off time, when I really know that I'm working with someone who is dedicated to doing that, from time to time, I'll send something over to the owner of the company like, hey, we need to get this in place, whatever it might be. And they're really in the mode of delegating things out when they say, here's my operations manager, they'll take care of this. And I love getting an email back like that because that means there's been a process put in place and they're starting to delegate things out, that they know who's handling what parts of the business. And that's really what we're talking about today, is getting something like that in place. It's a big step to take. It's not an easy one, but you have to start somewhere. Just start it's one small win after another. If we can just win today, we can put a process in today. We'll worry about winning tomorrow, right, Chris?
Yeah, and we've read this and we've seen this. Giving your managers the freedom to do the work and engaging them in planning should give them a sense of ownership too,
Totally.
So it's a big part.
So Chris, first reason why process is really important is that process, I think one of the biggest things, that it makes a business competitive. Having a really defined process, understanding where the strengths are, it allows you to be very efficient. And that comes through in your proposals. It comes through in the retention of your customers, really having clear lines and expectations that your customer will see that your company is working together as a cohesive team. What really starts to throw up some red flags is when you call, so for example, let's say that someone calls your company and they say, hey, I'd like to speak with our account manager. And your receptionist doesn't quite know who you are or what company, they don't even know that you're a customer. And then they finally find the right guy and he's not so familiar with your account. You're starting to see some fragments and do they really know what's going on inside their own company?
Yeah.
Or you have an account manager on site, the billing per your account's late and your bill's overdue and they're not even sure, they're not even aware, or the billing account isn't even aware that you've stopped service and they're still trying to collect on service that hasn't even been paid. Things like that will throw up some red flags. So really having a cohesive team coming together really makes you a lot more competitive. And Chris, I'm sure that's something that you've seen over your years of experience.
Yeah, and I had to realize that, growing a business, it's hard, it takes focus, it's a lot of stay power, right? A lot of work just to keep the account. And what I had to really do, because I wasn't probably I knew what I wanted to do with my team, but I wasn't a very good manager myself. I was a law enforcement guy. The only people I knew how to do was manage people when I was in a police officer uniform. And that was simple. Whatever I told them, a lot of them did back then. Not today. Not today. That's a whole different world today. But, it is. So you have to get your core team, like we mentioned, out in the field and just start with the basics and going out in the field to find out what are the problems. Have a conversation, right? Then we'll learn to manage. You got to have something. You got to know what you get what you get when you inspect, right?
Yeah,
they say.
Totally.
So it's knowing how to do that. Just get the information. Start with something at minimum, guys. Just something small.
Well, SilverTrack Nation, let's take a break and hear from our sponsors over at Paperless Proposal. We've all been there before. You put countless hours into a proposal, painstakingly nitpicked every last detail until you finally finish and click send. Then you spend the next several days thinking, did they get it? Did they like it? Have they even read it yet? Well, with Paperless Proposal, those worries are gone. Not only can you actually see when your prospect views your proposal, but you can see what pages they look at, how long they look at them, and who they forward the proposal to. All of these analytics help you gain valuable insight into how your prospective clients view and interact with your proposals, giving your sales team important data to close more contracts. So what are you waiting for? Head over to paperlessproposal.com/silvertrack to get a free demo and take advantage of a special offer just for our listeners. Now, let's get back to our featured conversation.
You know, the second reason why process is so important is that processes really start to enable growth in your company. And if you don't, and the reason why that's so important is that there needs to be, like, the volume of work is going to increase as you grow. By definition, as you grow, you're going to have more accounts, there's going to be more guards on site, you're going to have more time spent managing. If there's not a process in place, there becomes like a point of diminishing returns where an added account actually starts hurting your business. It hurts your retention. There's like a breaking point where if there's not a very solid process or a structure built within your company where we know who's handling what, whose responsibility is A, B, and C, if we don't have that in place, growth will actually reach a ceiling. We can't get past a certain point, so a lot of times we hear this one, 100 guards seems to be like a breaking point. A lot of times, like most of the companies that I would say 3 out of 5 companies that we talk to, Chris, that are looking for a tool like ours are at the 100 guard spot. How many times do we get on the phone? How many officers do you have? Oh, around 100. And that seems to be a breaking point where I need a tool now. In order to continue doing what I'm doing, I'm going to need a tool like SilverTrack to get past 100 guards. And so companies are coming to this realization, knowing that a process is really going to enable them to grow, and they have to get that process in place. You know, I think it's super important.
It's more than just sitting around the table and talking about it, right? And we talked this way too. Everything, they got to document what they're doing. Everything goes undocumented a lot of the times, right? It's just a matter, okay, we'll follow up next week. It's just somebody carrying. You'll see these guys sitting around the table barely scratching on their pad, right?
Yeah.
It should be very well driven each meeting, right? Details, how to communicate, you name it. It should all be there. But I think a lot of it, and I think you agree, is they really do, John. Everything's not documented process. They don't have process. They don't have systems.
And it's just hard on you. I know it just makes life a lot more difficult. I've been on both sides. I'm a very, very process oriented person. There's very few things that I'll do on a day-to-day basis that aren't in a process already or aren't being a part of a process. Just through the nature of our work, Chris, we're always improving our day-to-day productivity so that we can handle more and facilitate growing. And I know what it's like to not be in a process oriented. Everyone's kind of stands around scratching their head, and it'll. Like, have you ever seen like a sports highlight where, a little for baseball, like a bloopers hit to the outfield and the shortstop standing there and the second baseman standing there and the center fielder standing there and the ball just kind of falls right in the middle of all of them. And they're like, well, I thought you were going to get it. Well, I thought you were going to get it, and so you get this. That happens a lot in business when there's not a process in place. A lot of times something catches on fire and we say, well, I thought you were going to get it, or I thought the guard was going to get it.
How about this, Johnny? Tell me if you saw this in the businesses that you worked in. You see a lot of people that if you don't have a team and nobody's communicating and it's kind of like free will, do it your own, you'll see a lot of people for job security that are really sensitive about, sharing anything with the other groups, right?
Totally.
So pretty soon you find one person that's really the key player in the business. And I have to admit, I had one like that, right? And, wouldn't share anything, but knew everything. It was my go-to person, but it wasn't getting passed down the line.
Yeah.
So that can hinder a business big time.
Absolutely.
Especially in this industry, for some reason, everybody is so sensitive to, sharing. It's so competitive, it really is in all aspects.
I agree. So the third reason why process is really important, and probably my favorite reason, is that process drives profitability. It's really the way that you can start to put more money in your pocket. If you're at a point, so let's just take a very easy example. let's take a mobile patrol. Well, actually, we just talked to, or I don't know, by the time this episode airs, I don't know if, well, we just had an interview of Lawrence Borgens from Delta Protective. I don't know whether the interview will have aired by the time this episode airs or not, but we talked to Lawrence and he started his business. It was a magnet on the side of his car and a light on the top of his own personal car. There came a point where Lawrence had to say, if I'm not going to be the person in this car anymore, I'm going to have to put a process in place so not only can someone else do it well, but when I have a process in place now, I can measure every month, what are my costs? What are the areas that I can really start to drive efficiency so that I can be more profitable? If I'm not doing something consistent on a month-to-month basis, I'm chasing like a chicken with its head cut off. It's going to be here today. It's going to be somewhere else tomorrow. I'm chasing something that's very difficult to improve on, right? But when there's a process in place and I can measure how well is this performing every month, that's when I can really start to milk this process for every dollar it's worth, right, Chris? And it's very common to not have that in place, which is why a lot of times we can get to the end of the month and say, oh my gosh, I'm not making any money.
Yeah. Well, let me share something real quick. It's hard for me to share something quick, but when I had my call center, my dispatch center, I told you it was big money for me to support that center, right? So I was trying to figure out, because I heard so many complaints about, oh, we're so busy on the phone. I got radio traffic and the guards are constant. We need more help. We need more people. Well, I couldn't define the process. So at that particular time, way back when, there's a thing you ever heard of? I'm sure you have, Six Sigma. Right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's breaking down the process. Bill Welch from General Electric started it. So I started to read that book a little bit, and I thought, okay, well, let me see if I can just do this in a simple form. And what I did is I took a piece of paper and I had them write down everything they have to do when they take a call. Date, time, day of the week, the whole thing. And then after they wrote it down, I created boxes with checkpoints in it, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So they didn't even have to write the day. So when they took a message, they could circle it, who it was for, the day. They could circle the time. They could circle if it was a frequent caller, right? You see where I'm going?
Totally.
And it kind of gave me an idea right there. It gave me an idea. It's like, wow, now I'm really defining my process to see, as simple as it was, what we really have to do and what we could eliminate, right?
Yeah.
Even just doing that. So even something simple like that, you
know? So if you're sitting back and you're saying, man, I do want to become more competitive. I do want to enable growth in my business, and I do want to drive profitability all through adding a process. If you sit back and say, well, how do I start, or where do I really start? There's no answer. There's no right or wrong answer to this. What I would recommend doing, and what we've done here at SilverTrack, and we've seen companies put in place as a security company, is just start with one process. Just start with one problem. What area of your business that the ball from time to time can be dropped between supervisors or between different members of your management team. Start to just define one process. And this just goes just with a pencil and paper, or sitting down in front of a Word document and saying, when this situation happens, how are we going to handle it? Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, and just going through and line it out in excruciating detail and do the what ifs, because just articulating the process alone is going to allow you to improve it. You're probably going to think, man, why do we do things like that? Or shoot, I didn't realize all that went into this. It's just because you've been in the business and been doing it for so long. So just start with a single process, write it out, and show it to your whole team, and really start to enforce it. Say, you know what, that's not the way. When that situation arises again, say, hey, this is how we're going to handle this. And then when it's not handled according to the process, you have the ability to sit back and say, should we change the process, or do we need to change the way we're behaving? Because if we're ever going to go to the next level, it's going to require that we start becoming process oriented.
Yeah, when you standardize everything, you document the way the tasks are completed, you end up with consistency, right? The results that you want, and you can take a look at it. And what does it become? It almost becomes it could become your training manual later, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely, this is how I'm sure everyone's heard what gets measured can be improved. Like if you're measuring it, we can manage and improve the process. This is how management and people skills and the whole deal, like the intangibles of a business, start to become tangible, or we can start to mess with them and see how well is a certain supervisor performing. And this is really how your supervisors can step into your business, know where their area of what they're supposed to be managing, what their expectations are. When there's a process, it's very easy to define, hey, is this person doing a good job or are they not doing a good job? Which is exactly what we'll be covering in the next episode that talks about measuring tasks and communication, making sure that we have clear goals defined and metrics in place that say this is what it looks like to do a good job and this is what it looks like to do a bad job, or if you're underperforming. So you're not going to want to miss that episode. That'll be part 4 of this series. So if you want a detailed article on everything that we discussed today, a cool little checklist of why a process is really in place and how to really start that process, head over to silvertracksoftware.com/75. You'll find the show notes for this episode and tons of free resources that you won't want to miss out. So be sure to give those a look. Chris, anything else to add before we hop off?
No, it's great. Looking forward to the next podcast. We appreciate everybody that listens, and we've got quite a few people signing up this month, didn't we, John?
Yeah, I think we're averaging about 40 to 50 subscriptions per week. So we're people who are subscribing to the podcast, making sure that they get updates every time that we put a new episode out. So if you haven't done that yet, be sure to join the growing number of listeners to the Silver Track Extra. Very exciting.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, my name is Johnny Page.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
This is the Silver Track Extra, and we'll talk to you soon.